interrupt this program to bring you Courage, the Cowardly Dog Month.
Whole month of Courage, the Cowardly Dog. First appearing in 1996, it was picked up by Cartoon Network, who work in the middle of Burbank, and directed by cartoonist John Dilworth. Though many years have passed since the original air date, it's now time for Zack to celebrate this great show.
Well, old sport, what do you think? Neat.
Hey guys, Zack here, and welcome back to Courage Month. So, today's reviews we're going to be doing are Campsite of Terror and Record Deals. So let's get into both of those. Okay, so this episode, Campsite of Terror, does exactly what it says in the title, which is that the bags and Courage go camping. So it just kind of starts off with them actually sitting in their campsite. Courage is currently setting up a tent. Muriel is preparing snacks, and Eustace somehow managed to bring his entire setup from the house with him to the camping site. He's got his TV, his chair, and on top of that, he has a portable generator to plug the TV into. So, yeah, he just kind of brought his entire setup with him. All he's really missing is his newspaper, but, I'm sure if he had one, if he found a way to actually give the newspaper company his address in the middle of the woods, he probably would have that too. But in case, as Courage is trying to hammer the stakes in for the tent, Muriel offers him a lemonade, which is pointing out that he must be famished and absolutely needs it to keep his strength up, because he's cool, as she puts it, and kind of a little bit punny here. He's working like a dog, which he is. So she offers him a glass of lemonade. He drinks it and then burps, which causes the entire tent to collapse. But Muriel merely tells him to keep at it, and then gives him a cupcake to help him keep his energy up, which Eustace complains about, pointing out that he never gets a cupcake, and as everybody's saying up, there's actually a very apparently. So this episode just adds to the mystery of D. Lung and how weird and how wrong I was of him, because apparently he's apparently a millionaire. Apparently, and as Eustace is sitting in the middle of the woods, there's actually running an advertisement where they send him money, he helps them become rich. But which Eustace finds to be a bit of malarkey and hates millionaires. But in any case, during this entire scene, there's actually some strange chittering. And later everybody is actually getting ready to turn in for the night. Eustace is just sitting up watching his TV. It's late in the night as he pleases. And also still watching D. Lung's advertisement, which is just running on a constant loop, apparently. While Muriel unwittingly decides to torment Courage by telling him some scary stories, which Courage has mixed feelings about. Again, he's a scaredy cat. He's not the kind of guy to actually listen to scary stories. But Muriel doesn't really understand that he doesn't like scary stories, so he eventually just cowers inside one of the sleeping bags. But in any case, Eustace eventually is fed up with watching D. Lung's advertisements, and points out that when it comes to millionaires, money just kind of falls in their lap. And then money, suspiciously enough, actually winds up falling in Eustace's lap, which Eustace is happy about, and he actually goes to snatch up the dollar bill that has landed in his lap, but then it suddenly floats away, and as Eustace actually chases after it, it becomes increasingly apparent that it's that old stick a dollar bill on the end of a fishing line trick, and then just pull it. At which point, as Muriel is telling Courage's story about how one of the characters in the story let out a loud scream, Eustace suddenly lets out a loud scream because something happens to him off screen. And Muriel and Courage decide to go and investigate, wondering what happened to him. And they go to poke around, wondering where he wandered off to. When suddenly they see two pairs of eyes glaring out at them from the underbrush and from the darkness. And Muriel and Courage are a little confused as to what's going on, but then it's revealed that two raccoons just kind of emerge from the underbrush, and Muriel is initially very friendly with them, wondering if they've seen her husband and where they came from. But it's at this point where the raccoons show themselves to be incredibly violent. Case in point, they quickly level the campsite. They tie Courage to a tree with a giant chain, and then they tie a Muriel onto Eustace's chair and throw her, the chair, and Eustace's TV in the back of Eustace's truck, and then they drive off. With Muriel complaining about how it's not particularly comfortable. And Courage, fearing that the raccoons are going to eat her if he doesn't do something, actually tries to free himself from the chain, which only winds up causing him to pull the entire tree out with it. So yeah, he winds up just ruining the tree. He just uproots an entire tree with nothing but his sheer back strength, which is kind of impressive. But in any case, now that he's mobile-ish, Courage tree and all, then starts running around hollering for Muriel to try and figure out where she went. At which point he hears Eustace hollering for him and calling at which point Courage then goes to investigate, because obviously he hears stupid dog and realizes that Eustace is probably in danger, and he eventually goes out to discover that Eustace is actually perched on one of those balancing cliff things. If you guys don't know, they're like these rocks that are like perfectly balanced on the stalagmites, and they're kind of cool looking, and I'm not entirely sure how they work, but in case Eustace hollers to Courage to quit playing around with the tree and get him down. So Courage does, but in the process he accidentally causes the cliff between him and Eustace to collapse. And he unwittingly winds up making a bridge with the tree that's on his back. And at which point, it also winds up hitting Eustace. Eustace winds up getting hit with the tree limbs and the leaves. But Eustace winds up emerging unscathed and actually climbs on top of the tree and actually begins to make his way over to the other side. And now, as he's there, he actually points out that Courage needs to quit screwing around and actually undoes the chain, which causes Courage to actually fall off the tree. But then it gets snagged on a branch, which causes Courage to yo-yo back up onto the tree. And Courage yells at him to quit screwing around. At which point they continue to go back to the campsite, and Eustace actually discovers a wanted poster for the two raccoons, who are apparently wanted for a reward, and are apparently it's very important that they're actually found. But in any case, Eustace recognizes the raccoons immediately as the people who stuck him on that balancing cliff. At which point, Courage then proceeds to explain what happened while Eustace was gone. And Eustace isn't really all that concerned, and also finds it a little bit funny that they beat up Courage. Up until he finds out that they have his truck, his wife, his TV, and his chair. At which point he decides it's time to roll. They then proceed to start working together. And decide to actually start following the tire track, since that's the most obvious way to actually go and find the raccoons. And with Courage trying to sniff the trail out, but Eustace just telling him that it's a lot easier to follow the tire tracks and to stop sniffing. So they do that, and they eventually do find the cave with Eustace's truck parked out in front of it. So Eustace and Courage actually hide out in front of the cave, and Eustace makes Courage go and look. And at which point Courage actually hears somebody screaming, and believing it to be Muriel, he actually rushes into the cave, but then quickly discovers that no, and as it turns out, Muriel is completely fine. The raccoons aren't dangerous at all, and they're just watching a movie. And which understandably confuses Courage, because they seemed very dangerous when they attacked him in the woods not 2 minutes ago. And he actually kind of cocks his head a little bit and is completely confused as to what's going on. So Muriel goes on to explain that all they're really looking for is a mother figure. And then she invites him to sit down, which the raccoons have mixed feelings about, but Muriel reassures him that he's part of the family and that he's kind and that he won't actually hurt them. So he proceeds to actually snuggle up on Muriel's lap while the raccoons actually snuggle up on the top of Eustace's chair. But to spite Courage for kind of stealing their quote-unquote mother, they then eat all of the popcorn that they've prepared, so that there's none left for Courage. At which point Eustace realizing he can actually make a fortune from actually catching the raccoons, and after actually finding out that they're docile, he decides to actually go in and actually catch them to make some quick money, and that's exactly what he does. He grabs a net from his truck and scoops the two raccoons up in it, with Muriel hollering at him not to let them go, pointing out that they did nothing wrong and they're just poor misunderstood children, as she puts it. But Eustace refuses, pointing out A, they stole his chair and all of his other stuff. And B, they can easily make him some easy money, which he's all about. So he then leaves with the net full of raccoons. At which point Muriel urges Courage to do something, much to Courage's chagrin. So he comes up with a really brilliant idea, which is that once Eustace is actually clear of the cave, Courage actually pretends to be an angry raccoon parent. Using a giant cardboard cutout, and actually scares off Eustace and tells Eustace to leave the raccoons alone, which Eustace unwittingly agrees to because he winds up being scared by the quote unquote giant raccoon, and then he runs off to go get some things from his truck. At which point the raccoons believe that it actually is one of their own kind until Courage reveals that it is actually just a giant cardboard cutout, and they pull him into a fierce hug, and it is their way of kind of apologizing for being mean to him earlier. And also that it shows that they don't have no hard feelings. But in any case, Eustace hasn't quite learned his lesson, so he's actually rooting through the back of his truck to get an even bigger net, pointing out that if the little raccoons were worth a fortune, then the big raccoon obviously is going to make him a lot more. But he doesn't actually get an opportunity to go catch the big raccoon because right at that exact moment the two raccoons actually wind up attacking him and beating him up. So at which point Muriel and Courage actually return home, with Muriel pointing out that camping actually takes a lot out of them. And they actually snack on some cupcakes, but then she wonders when Eustace is actually going to come home, and as it turns out, never. As it turns out, they actually dressed up, in addition to Eustace being badly beaten by the raccoons, they've actually dressed him up in an apron, and to just kind of make him a fake Muriel, so that the raccoons can just have him to be their mother figure, much to Eustace's chagrin, because he doesn't really want to be a mother, but he has no choice because he's now shit scared of the raccoons, basically. So at which point another one of D-Long's advertisements come on, and at which point Eustace points out that he actually hates hate millionaires quite a bit. But in any case, yeah, this episode is kind of interesting. The way it works is that it's just like Eustace, obviously his greed eventually gets the best of him. That's the big thing. But also raccoons are fucking terrifying. So that's what this episode sets up. It's like, yeah, they're docile when they're friendly, but when they're not, they can mess you up. And that is what the episode is. But in any case, yeah, that's my review of Campsite of Terror. Onward to the next review. Okay, so this episode, Record Deal, actually opens up a bit of Eustace's personality that we never heard before, and we've never really heard about before, but this episode is kind of centered around that, while also kind of having a supernatural spooky thing thrown in as well. But the episode opens up with Shirley the medium, who is currently in the middle of doing some spring cleaning. And while she's actually going through all of her stuff, she actually is throwing out all of her junk when she comes across a Velvet Vic record and decides to chuck it out the window since she no longer needs it. Meanwhile, Eustace, who is driving by in his truck, is revealed to actually be a very big Velvet Vic fan. As we find out, he very much listens to Velvet Vic on the radio, but as he's passing by Shirley's trailer, the radio actually cuts out and stops working. He actually isn't able to actually get a clear signal from it anymore, and he kind of breaks it in the process of trying to get it to work again by just slamming his feet and hands on the dashboard until it tries to work, which doesn't work, like, at all, and he just winds up breaking the radio even further, which he then becomes frustrated with. At which point the Velvet Vic record actually winds up flying into his passenger side door and hitting him in the face, which causes him to get into a car accident. He runs into an electric pole and his car just falls over. But despite being supposed to be the fact that he's supposed to be badly injured from that, he winds up seeing that as a net gain since he wound up getting a record of one of his favorite musical artists of all time, which he points out isn't really all that bad. At which point he then recovers from his car accident, brings the record home, and actually finds a record player to actually play it on. And as he's playing it, he starts playing it on the record, and actually tells Muriel to come out and help him out, and come listen to his new record. But Muriel is busy because she's currently in the process of making everybody lunch. So she winds up not coming in at the moment. But in any case, when she refuses, then starts working to try and get the best seat in the house, as it were. He starts moving his chair around, and he can actually find the optimal angle to listen to music. And Courage is real to not very much care for Velvet Vic. He hears the record and he immediately covers his ears because he does not like Velvet Vic's music. But as it turns out, the music is actually the least of Courage's problems, because then he actually sees what is presumably the ghost of Velvet Vic himself actually emerge from the record, and Velvet Vic does indeed emerge from the record for a brief moment. At which point, Courage realizes that something supernatural is going on with Eustace's record, and swiftly turns the record player off, which causes Velvet Vic's spirit to go back into the record before he can do any further harm. And at which point, Eustace understandably scolds Courage for touching his record, and turning it off without even explaining what it was actually happening. And then he proceeds to kick Courage out of the house for turning his record off. At which point he turns the record player back on, and Velvet Vic fully materializes this time. He actually sits down at the piano and actually starts playing. Much to Eustace's delight, because again, he's a big Velvet Vic fan, and now Velvet Vic is in his house. And understandably, Eustace is very happy, and actually tells Muriel to hurry up and come out with the sandwiches, because as he points out, Velvet Vic is in their house, and he actually introduces her. And Muriel doesn't seem to know who Velvet Vic is. She just greets him and says that, and kind of shakes his hand a little bit. But to this point, where Muriel then tells Velvet Vic to actually help himself to some sandwiches, and actually sets them down on Eustace's chair, and Eustace starts snacking on them. And Courage is watching this whole display from outside. He's very worried that Velvet Vic is going to pull something, and he's very paranoid that Velvet Vic is going to wind up causing problems if he's left alone to his own devices. But then the song on the record actually ends, and Velvet Vic is then sucked back into the record, much to his chagrin. Which Courage believes is a good thing, since he realizes now that Velvet Vic can't manifest himself unless the record is playing. But then Eustace decides to actually play the record again, pointing out that he just likes the song. And Velvet Vic then decides to fully materialize, and Eustace, and once he comes out, Eustace offers him a sandwich. But Velvet Vic merely asks Eustace if he swings, which Eustace points out he doesn't on account of a medical condition that he apparently has. But then when Muriel actually comes back in with some drinks, he asks Muriel if she swings. But she points out she did indeed play when she was younger, and decides to actually take Velvet Vic up on his offer, and pushes him aside and starts playing at the piano with him. While Velvet Vic actually gets up to dance with Eustace a little bit, much to Eustace's chagrin and then delight, because he actually does like dancing with Velvet Vic, and Velvet Vic is very upbeat and energetic to dance with. But in any case, while in the process, Velvet Vic is actually intentionally very rough with Eustace, because he actually sends him flying into the closet, and then when he stops the record, which causes Muriel to get sucked into it instead. Which freaks Courage out, because now he's realizing that Velvet Vic did indeed have sinister intent the whole time. At which point, Velvet Vic breaks the record over his knee, pointing out that they're not going to be listening to those sad old tunes anymore, and then proceeds to actually get ready to go out. But Eustace, who actually emerges from the closet with a fishbowl stuck on his head, asks Velvet Vic where he's going, and Velvet Vic merely responds that he's actually going back on the road to actually recapture his musical career, and Eustace wonders if there's actually any money to be had going on the road, at which point Velvet Vic confirms that there is, and quite a bit of it. So Eustace decides to volunteer to be Velvet Vic's road manager and actually help him schedule his gigs. And with that, the two actually leave the Bag farmhouse. Meanwhile, Courage comes into the house and is dismayed to discover about the broken record, and actually tries to fix it using duct tape and masking tape, and he doesn't succeed in successfully piecing the record together. But plays it, Muriel comes out a big jumbled mess. There's limbs where there aren't supposed to be limbs, her face is all messed up, and there's just a whole bunch of other things that are wrong with her, so Courage actually turns off the record and Muriel is sucked back in. At which point he tries to think about anybody who could possibly help, and then at which point he decides to actually call up Dr. Vindaloo and proceeds to head immediately to his medical practice, where Dr. Vindaloo quickly picks up on what's actually going on with Courage and his record, and points out that he has a machine that can actually help her get out of the record and actually possibly fix her. Pointing out that it'll actually clone him a new record. And once the new record is actually ready, Courage then takes it out of it. The machine looks like a toaster, by the way. I'm just gonna explain that. But he then proceeds to take it out of the machine, and puts it on the record player in Dr. Vindaloo's office. But when Muriel does come out and seems to be fine at first, but until Courage realizes that she has two heads when she was only supposed to have one. At which point he takes the record out and takes the record off and actually goes to retrieve the original record from the machine and then goes to go find somebody else who can actually help. At which point, it's at this point where Velvet Vic has actually set up a massive concert in nowhere and has actually gathered quite a crowd. Apparently, he's not only Eustace's favorite performer, but he was actually a pretty important performer in general, and apparently a lot of people like him, and a lot of people like his music. So he at which point Eustace is actually collecting money for letting everybody in. He's collecting admission fees. And Courage actually runs up to Eustace and actually tries to tell him about the record. And meanwhile, Shirley is actually coming by with her truck, with her wagon full of junk, trying to sell it because she doesn't have room for it in her trailer. At which point she sees the poster advertising Velvet Vic's performance. Here's the music playing, and then sees Courage run out with a broken record. And wonders if it is indeed the same record that she threw out that morning. At which point Eustace decides to actually pick up Courage and chuck him, and pointing out that he's getting in the way of his profits. And then Courage actually winds up landing at Shirley's feet. At which point Shirley asks Courage if that would happen to be a Velvet Vic record that he's holding, and Courage does indeed point out that it is, and then proceeds to explain to her what happened. Which Shirley then fully understands, and then points out that the only way to actually get Muriel out and get Velvet Vic back in the record is to actually play the record while he's performing, which is pretty easy to do considering that he's currently performing in front of millions of people. But obviously the record is a different matter entirely. So Courage actually wonders if she can actually fix it, but she points out that ironically, despite being a supernatural record with a ghost living in it, she points out that no magic can actually fix the record. And then advises that he, as she puts it, go digital. At which point Courage then proceeds to run back to the house and enlists the help of the computer, who, after making a joke about how music is bad for you, pointing out that that's probably why Muriel actually winds up getting sucked into the record, then asks Courage to actually put it in the scanner and hand it over, as it were. So Courage puts it in the computer scanner, and the computer then proceeds to scan the record, copy the music verbatim, and then put it on a CD, which Courage can then actually play on a more modern device. At which point Courage then proceeds to actually bring the TV back to the backstage of Velvet Vic's performance, and with a boombox then proceeds to play the CD on it. At which point Muriel actually emerges from the CD. And actually takes up Velvet Vic's spotlight and starts playing on it a little bit, with Velvet Vic pointing out that she's actually cramping his style a little bit, but she merely takes offense to it while he's actually performing. And now that Velvet Vic is playing and she isn't, Courage is actually able to suck Velvet Vic back into the not record anymore, but more of a CD. At which point he takes the CD out of the CD player and Velvet Vic is fully sucked back into the record, while Muriel actually takes over his performance and actually winds up wooing the crowd in front of millions of people, since obviously she had a very dramatic entrance, and then she on top of that she just knows Velvet Vic's music as well, by having been stuck in a loop where she's been taking his place for the longest time. So obviously she's pretty accustomed to his music at this point. And then the crowd cheers, but with much to Eustace's chagrin, since he points out that Muriel actually stole Velvet Vic's spotlight, and is a little bit annoyed at Courage, not so much because Courage actually did something, but because Eustace thinks he did something, which is grounds enough. And then actually goes to actually race after to go chase after Courage and actually punish him for actually ruining the whole thing with Velvet Vic. But in the process, he accidentally trips. At which point Shirley shows up and takes the CD from Courage and the money and all of Eustace's money that he made off of Velvet Vic. And when Eustace complains, pointing out that that's his, Shirley merely responds licensing fees and leaves, which is kind of the funniest part of this whole episode. She's just like, hey, Eustace is just like, hey, that's mine. Licensing fees, bitch. And then leave. It's probably the greatest one-liner. But in any case, she leaves. At which point, Muriel, Courage, and Eustace actually return back to the Bag Farm with Muriel merely remarking that she's glad everything's back to normal, and also that Eustace really does love his music. But and at which point it's revealed that Eustace is actually trying to find Velvet Vic. He's trying to find another record for Velvet Vic to emerge out of, but he's not having any luck going through his record collection. And in one particular instance, he calls into the horn of the record player, saying that he knows Velvet Vic can hear him, but then he's actually pulled in by whoever actually lives in the record, and that's how the episode ends. So yeah, this episode is kind of interesting in that it's about apparently Velvet Vic. Apparently there's like this big performer called Velvet Vic who lives in the world of Courage the Cowardly Dog, and apparently he died, and his spirit wound up being imprisoned in a record somehow. It's not entirely clear how that happened, and again, Courage the Cowardly Dog. It's not one of those shows that actually explains everything. It was just one of those go forth and embrace the randomness. But it is interesting is Velvet Vic himself, because Velvet Vic is obviously the antagonist of the episode, but what's interesting is that apparently he's a very famous performer in nowhere. He's obviously he's dead because he's a ghost possessing a record, but it's implied that before he died, he was actually a very famous performer, and his entire antagonistic role is that once he's actually free of the record by actually finding a surrogate to actually take over his role in the record for him, his first instinct is just actually go on the road and try and reclaim his fame. He goes out to actually regain his fame and fortune that he made when he was alive, which is interesting. It's a little bit one-tracky of him, ironically considering that he's the ghost of a record. But yeah, it is a little bit one-tracky of him to actually, where he's just like, I wasn't famous enough when I was alive, and now I'm super famous once I was dead. Now that I'm back, I am going to just do whatever I can to actually maintain my fame. And to be fair, he probably would have played music literally forever because he's a ghost. So yeah, that is kind of one of the sounder plans that a villain has had in this series. Now that I'm thinking about it, his plan is to secure his fame indefinitely because he's a ghost and he can't die. So he can't die again. He's already dead. So yeah, it's kind of interesting in that regard. But in any case, that's my review of Courage the Cowardly Dog. What do you guys think? Let's get discussing them in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Also, be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It doesn't really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way of saying thanks. And I am trying to do more projects like this, so if you want to see more of these, then by all means, check out my link. Check out my Patreon. Again, link is down in the description and on the end screen. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is the video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So, if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. And also be sure to check out my Twitch because I'm streaming a bunch of horror games to go along with Courage Month as well. And also I just stream every Sunday in general, so if you guys want to see those, again, link is down in the description. Please go check those out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!